Hey guys, welcome back to the shop for part 3 of Project YZ. What are we going to do today? Let's take a look. All right, so today we're going to pull the old bearings and seals out of the cases, both halves. We're going to press the new ones in. We're going to put new seals in. And when we're done, we're going to have the new crank pressed in and the transmission back and ready to go. So let's take a look at what goes in to doing that. All right, so I've got my YZ144 engine case in here. I've got the arbor plates in place. I've got a socket of the right size. It's an impact socket. Some of these things you got to use a blind bearing puller to get out, but this one you can actually push. So let's give it a shot and see how it goes. Try to pull up the view. Oh my goodness. I tell you, for everybody who's ever been banging these things out with a hammer, unbelievable. All right, so here's my left-hand engine case. Crank bearing out, transmission bearing out. One more transmission bearing still in there. We need a blind bearing puller to get that one out. Now this bearing doesn't seem too bad. This crank bearing on this side, a little bit crunchy. I wouldn't be comfortable putting that back in there. Let's look at how you get this guy out where you don't have access to drive it out with a press or with a socket. All right, so if you haven't seen this before, this piece, blind bearing puller, goes in the bearing. When you drive this into it, it expands it, so you're grabbing as much of the bearing as you possibly can, and then slide hammer to get the bearing out. So we're going to crank that down a bit. Now we got to get that out of there. I am going to heat that case up a little bit to help me, and then I'm going to whack it with a slide hammer. All right, so I just heated it up a little bit. Get this thing threaded on there. And then I kind of luck it all, a couple of pops. This guy should come out of there. That's how you get one of those out. All right, so then once you got it out, take this off, your bearing comes out, and this bearing, which the transmission shafts run on, is pretty crunchy. Now, pulling it out like that certainly doesn't help it, but I'm glad we're replacing this. All right, so this half, I'm going to clean up those races just a little bit and put the new bearings in, and it's good to go. All right, for the new ones, and oh, they are oh so smooth. You hear that? Versus no sound. Big impact socket. I am going to press them in on my new shop press, and carefully, one at a time, I'm going to heat the cases up before I go ahead and do that. So it's going to heat this up, just make it a little bit bigger, press it in, make sure it's good, do the next one. Pretty straightforward. All right, and there we are with brand new bearings on this side of the case. So next thing to do is put the seals in, and then we'll get on with the rest of it. Actually, before I put the seals in, I got to put these little bearing retainers back in there. I will tighten them up with the impact, Loctite them, and make sure this is clean. If it's not clean, the Loctite's not going to work. All right, so finally this side, aside from these studs, which I think I'm going to replace, bearings in, bearing retainers in, Loctited, impacted, new crank seal, new transmission seal, new shifter seal. I'm going to put a little assembly lube on these right now so I don't forget, and then I'm going to do the next case half. And really that's the process. You do the two of them, you get everything new, you put the engine back together. Now, if you take a look at this part, the old studs have the unthreaded part at the top. I put two new ones in, and I have them upside down. Knucklehead. So I've got to take them out. Now, luckily, since I just put them in, taking them out is as easy as putting two nuts on them, putting the other nut on the top there, and then putting a wrench on the bottom one and spinning them out. And then, of course, you got to clean the threads out and put them in the right way. So cleaning the threads out is a relatively straightforward process. I take the right size tap, and in this case it's 8mm by I think 1.25. Put a little bit of grease on it because as you're cleaning the threads out, you're going to be really pulling out old thread sealant and basically rust. Those things were really stuck in there. And you don't want that going into all of your new bearings. In fact, I should have done this first, but I didn't. So I'm being really careful. I'm going to run that tab through it again, get it all cleaned out. And then when I'm done, I've got to run some brake cleaner through there, use a rag or some paper towels, and really get that hole as clean as it can be so that I can put the stud in the right way, use a little bit of Loctite on there, and make sure that they don't come out. Now this side was the easier side. On the other case where the studs are longer, I had a couple of challenges, and we're going to take a look and see what we did about that coming up here in just a second. All right, so for the other studs, which are longer and go in deeper, I had to heat up the bottom of the case, which is really where the threads are. So I took my torch, heated that up, did the same thing on the other side. I used that larger pair of vice grips that you can see to really get a good grip on them. And then I had to gently put the cases in the vise to hold it still, wiggle that vice grip back and forth very, very slowly until you hear them crack loose, and then you can take them out. Last thing you want to have happen is for those things to break. All right, a couple of last things to close out this episode. So here's the old studs. Here's the two for this side of the case. You'll notice that one side of the case is longer than the other side. In fact, when I got them, you can see there's two different part numbers that come. And I actually ordered the two different part numbers, but between ordering them and then doing this, I forgot there was a difference. So in any case, you got to make sure you get the right ones on the right side. I'm going to get some Loctite on these and get them in place. And then this case and the other case are ready to go. So the last thing I've been doing here is just going in and removing as much of the old case sealant as you can, because we're going to redo this, obviously, once we seal everything up. Use a plastic razor blade for that. Nothing metal, right? You don't want to gouge any of these surfaces. All right, so with the cases all ready to go, new bearings and seals and everything, we're gonna put the engine back together. I like this part because we're gonna start to get some room back in the bench. So brand new crank, hot rods crank, came with the 144 kit. So the first thing we gotta do is pull this in. I have a Tusk crank puller. So you start by just dropping it in. It's not going to go the whole way. So with it dropped into place, now we have to hook up the crank puller. This is a slightly delicate operation. So you slide on the end of the puller. You find the little adapter that matches your crank. You thread that on there. That seats like that. And this piece is the actual piece that's going to do the pulling. You thread that on. This goes over the top of that. Somehow. Oh, there's a little keyway to line the keyway up. And then get it, I'm gonna back it up a little bit, put this nut on here just to get it started. And then you need these two rods to align the puller on. I'm trying to do this so I can film it, which is probably not the best bet. You want it to be straight as well. Okay, so at this point, the crank is supported. I'll flip it over in my little jig here. And now we are in a position where we can crank down on this nut and pull it in. Now you might be asking yourself, hey, you used your shop press pretty successfully. Why are you not using that now? I'm not confident enough about pressing in a crankshaft, to be candid. I am more confident in this pull technique. So, all that being said, let's get the crank at top dead center. I'm gonna find a socket that fits that, and we're just gonna crank it right down. So let's do that. All right, 26 millimeter socket, and away we go. And I'm not sure you can see that, so let me get a better view here if I can. All right, so just keep your eyes on the crank. As you tighten it, we're pulling it up into place. And I've got to move the camera back because now it's in my way. But you get the idea. At this point, I've got to change the orientation so I can see what I'm doing. Now the crank is supposed to be a top dead center, and it was a top dead center when I started. And it's not a top dead center now, so I'm just gonna pause for a moment and make sure that I'm doing this right. I'll get back to top dead center. Put those two bars back into place. I've got a better view now of what I'm doing. And let's just continue carefully to pull that guy in. And I believe we have just bottomed out. So let's take it off and take a look at our work. That looks good. And what I do notice is my crank seal pushed out a little bit, so we're gonna have to carefully push that back into place. But otherwise, I believe we're in there. All right, so my Chilton manual of all things shows me how to mesh the gears together first before I try to drop them in there. I've done that. I've got my left shift fork on there as well. And I'm gonna see if I can drop this in. I struggled a little bit getting that left shift fork in, but then what I ended up doing was reaching in here with a screwdriver and just lifting this gear up a little bit. And that allowed me to pop that right in there. So if you're struggling to get that in, try the same thing. All right, so I have the shift arms in there. I've got the transmission in there. Seems like when it's lined up the right way, it spins and it doesn't bind. I'm gonna put in the drum. I'm gonna put in the two pins, and we'll see how it goes. And of course, you gotta fool with this to get things lined up right. And I'm sure there's some method to this madness. Of course, I can't really see. All right, I think I've showed you this trick before in a different video, but if you've got one of these magnetic shop lights and nothing to stick it to, I use a scrap piece of angle iron to light up my workspace. So once you got those forks in, move them off to the side, drop this in. The bottom line is, here they call them left, center, right. This one goes in the bottom groove, this one goes in the top groove, and this one over here goes in the middle groove. So get them lined up, and the grooves being the grooves in the shift mechanism. Get them lined up, and then put the pins in. All right, so after lining up the transmission the way they suggested and dropping it in, using my screwdriver to lift up that left shift fork a little bit or lift up the gear to get that shift fork in place, left, center, right, putting the shift drum in there, and remember, left one, bottom groove, center one, center groove, this one, top groove. Once that's all done, now we have a nice spinning, no binding transmission. Crank is in place. Don't forget, hopefully you replace this little O-ring that goes over there. Before you put the two case halves together, don't forget that. This is gonna call it for this video. In the next video, we're gonna put the Yama bond on the other case, drop it in place, pull the crank through, and start to button this thing back up again. And why am I gonna stop here? Because I wanna go back and read the manual and make sure I'm not missing anything before I get into those next steps. So that's it for today, guys. Hope this is useful, and as always, thanks for watching.